The SEC is facing change. In 2024, Texas and Oklahoma will be on board. What is the new schedule going to look like for the SEC? Will it be 8 games? Will it be 9 games? This week, SEC head coaches, ADs, and presidents descended upon Sandestin, Florida to try to figure it all out. And maybe the quote of the entire year came from Eli Drinkwitz. He said, every time I come to one of these meetings, I'm blown away that the 13 colonies actually formed a union. If we can't agree on an 8-game or 9-game schedule, how in the world did they all get together and decide how we were going to defeat the British? That is a excellent quote from Eli Drinkwitz, and it is one that frames our discussion today. Should the SEC have an 8-game schedule or a 9-game schedule going forward with Texas and Oklahoma entering the league? We'll break that down here on Southeastern 14. 8 games versus 9 games. There's some schools that are in favor of 9, some are in favor of 8. Different ways of looking at this. However, the main factor here is money. There is no question about it. I think all college football fans would like to see a 9-game SEC schedule because that's one more competitive game versus playing somebody like an Austin Peay or an East Tennessee State, something along those lines. However, there's so much more to it when it comes to the money side of this. Right now, the contract between the SEC and ESPN only accounts for 8 conference games. So there would be additional revenue that the SEC feels that they are due, especially with bigger brands like Texas and Oklahoma coming into the fold in 2024, if it were to add another conference game to go to 9 games instead of the current 8-game schedule. Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, both 2 guys that are kind of the tip of the spear when it comes to this deal because of how they've won, their influence over the league, things of that nature. They kind of see it as indifferent. Nick Saban a little bit more strongly leaning towards the 8-game schedule. Kirby Smart thinks it is what it is, whatever it is. You got to win your games to go forward. And winning games the last couple of years has not been a problem for him. So I don't think that he's too worried about that. But the thing that he's concerned about, Kirby Smart brought up, is it going to be a competitive disadvantage actually for someone to compete in the SEC championship game and then go on to the playoff, the new 12-team playoff that's going to be instituted in 2024, meaning that, okay, at the end of a grueling 8 or 9 game schedule, you take the top 2 teams because divisions are going out. They're playing an SEC championship game, which he says is going to be the most physical game of the year that you play. And then you have to turn around and go play in a playoff game 1 week or 2 weeks later, depending on how the result of that game goes. Remember, conference champions are the highest 4 ranked conference champions will get a bye in the new format of the 12-team college football playoff. So that is one aspect to look at it. Okay, adding one more SEC game, that would be, if you play a 9-game schedule and then you have the SEC championship, that would be 10 SEC games in a year. Guys, the SEC is a physical conference. It takes a toll on these athletes' body to get through the season. It's the closest thing to the NFL that you can come by. Take a look at how many the last 17 years the SEC has put the most players in the NFL draft for each of those seasons, those draft years. And it is just a incredibly tough league to navigate. So playing potentially 10 SEC games could be very tough. We saw what kind of a grind that was when the SEC was totally all conference schedule in the COVID year of 2020, playing 10. Well, that Georgia tried to play 10. Vanderbilt ducked out on them, but everybody had 10 conference games scheduled. Okay, so now you take a look at if what's the benefit of the 8-game? Yes, you're still going to get the cupcake games probably for a little while, but the reason that is because guys, there's contracts that have been signed already that are years out, and it would cost some of these schools millions of dollars to get out of some of these games. You're talking about a Florida having to look at a UCF or a Miami and say, hey, we've got to drop one of you two guys because now we have to play another conference game. That is a reality that would have to happen, and it would be difficult logistically to go through and do something like that. It's estimated, I saw Trey Wallace of Outkick put out that it's estimated that some of these SEC schools feel that adding another conference game should add another $3 to $5 million worth of revenue to the TV contract of what they're having to do because of some of that replacement value with what these guys would have to pay out to get out of some of these contracts. Because remember, these are come here and we'll pay you money to help out your athletic program games for some of these FCS schools, for some of these non-Power 5 schools that their athletic programs really depend on these kind of games to help them meet their annual budget year in and year out. It's kind of the rich giving to the poor type deal that has helped sustain that level of college football for a while. Now, Hugh Freeze and Lane Kiffin and others have championed, hey, let's play those kind of games in the spring so that people can still get paid their money. Everybody can still have their programs and have their budget, but the more competitive games are getting played in the fall. Now, Nick Saban is a proponent of the 8-team schedule, eight game conference schedule, but he's also a proponent of every team having to play an all Power 5 schedule. Now, that is going to be difficult to get to because of, like I said, the contracts and how far out college football schedules things. And I think that is something that college football as a whole, not just the SEC, needs to look at. There's been much debate. Many people have gone on record saying that the college football landscape, college football as a whole, is missing an opportunity to take advantage of a captive audience and get some eyeballs on the game in the offseason, because they could really change how they release the scheduling, when the contracts are made for these games. I think we all saw during COVID that, teams like to put out, and institutions like to put out, well, things have been done a certain way and it takes time to do things. But we all saw during COVID, there's games that can be scheduled very rapidly and things can be done quickly when they need to be. Really, it's all about the money and how this is going to go down, how it's going to affect the bottom line of each team. But when you're talking about what looks like it's going to happen out of this, I think some of these rivalries are going to go away. There's going to be, Georgia and Auburn, the Deep South's oldest rivalry. They play every year. That may not be the case anymore. I think what you're looking at is probably an 8-game conference schedule with one permanent opponent, not 3 permanent opponents, at least for the first couple of years. And then every team will play each other home and home by the time these 4 years are done. It'll be a 4-year rotation, and everybody will have played every school at least once, home and home, in the series. Now, that does not count Georgia versus Florida. It is a neutral site game in Jacksonville, and that contract has been extended. And even with the renovation coming in 26 and 27, that still looks to be a neutral site game. And then you add Texas and Oklahoma to that, you would have to think that they would probably be the permanent opponent for each other every year if you're going to keep tradition in things. And they play at the Cotton Bowl each year. Some unique circumstances in a couple of those rivalries. We'll see which ones get kept as permanent. It would be tragic to some that some of these big time rivalries end. It would be not a big deal to others. It'd be the cost of progress, as Kirby Smart said this past week. So I think all of this is very intriguing. I think right now it's going to lean much more towards a 8-game conference schedule, because think about it, guys, you're going to a 12-team playoff, and that's adding more games to try to become the champion. Do you really want to add another SEC game on top of it in terms of the physical toll that takes on your team week in and week out? Now, will it get to that way one day? Who knows? I think it would be great. This is just my personal opinion here. If college football as a whole had a commissioner, all the conferences were under one commissioner. You could still have the commissioners of the independent conferences, but they would all report to someone, kind of like the NFL under Roger Goodell, but they would all have a commissioner that we have some sort of uniformity in scheduling, some sort of uniformity when it comes to the way this is all going to be handled in terms of standards and things like that, because now you're going to have a college football playoff committee that is deciding, okay, who are the best 12 teams to get in? Of course, you have the conference champions that takes care of part of that, but then you got at least 6 at large that are going to try to get in there. And all the criteria, it's hard to compare if some are playing an 8-game conference schedule, some are playing a 9-game conference schedule. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens in terms of on record. Some schools that prefer the 8-game format versus the 9-game format, you would see Alabama would be on that list. South Carolina and Kentucky are on that list. Georgia, kind of indifferent, doesn't really care. Kirby Smart at least has said that. Some schools that prefer a 9-game schedule would be Missouri, Florida, LSU, and Texas A&M. And I think the argument for some of those schools is that, hey, if you play a 9-game conference schedule, then when it comes time to probably be an at-large selection, which I think most of those schools right now would slot into, not more so being the SEC champ, except maybe LSU year in and year out, you've got a better chance of making that over a team in another conference, because you can say, hey, we played in the hardest league there is, and we played 9 conference games, plus we played some tough non-conference games as well. I think that really helps with the at-large bid process. So I think it's a tale of two tales. Okay, you got Alabama, Georgia, that, hey, why are we going to put ourselves at risk for any more injury, things like that? We got the playoffs to look forward to year in and year out. That's kind of where they are right now as a program. And then on the other side of that, you have programs that say, hey, we want to bolster our resume to try to get in as an at-large bid in the college football playoff going forward. But also going back to the 8-game side, Kentucky and South Carolina, listen, they can probably benefit from saying, hey, we need to make sure we get to a certain amount of wins every single year. That helps us with our bowl game selection. That also helps us to bolster resume as well. That's how they're looking at it. So there's so many different ways. But I thought Eli Drinkowitz's comment on, as a former history teacher, of why he was so amazed that the colonies were able to get together at one point and decide, hey, we're going to bond together and have a revolution against the British, when the SEC can't even decide on a 8-game or 9-game schedule. I think that is both tremendously accurate and also hilarious all at the same time. Excited to see where this thing goes. Please leave your comments below on, do you think the SEC should have an 8-game schedule, a 9-game schedule? Like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and we'll catch all you guys next time here on Southeastern 14.